Just in time for the presidential debate on foreign policy, there is new turmoil in the Middle East. This morning, a soldier in Jordan was killed by militants trying to cross into Syria, a sign that the unrest in Syria is spilling into neighboring countries. Today, protests continue in Beirut following a car bombing on Friday that killed Lebanon's security chief. The opposition party in Lebanon is claiming that Syria's president is behind the attack. And in what could have the biggest impact on the debate tonight, a weekend report by the New York Times asserts that the U.S. and Iran have agreed on bilateral negotiations over the Iranian nuclear program. Both the White House and Iranian officials deny there has been an agreement. But on Sunday, Obama advisor David Axelrod suggested that Iranian willingness to negotiate is proof that the president's strategy is working.
There's a tremendous disquiet in Iran. Their currency has dropped in value by 50%. Their oil business has dropped by 50%. And they're feeling the heat. And that's what the sanctions were meant to do.
This morning, Romney's senior foreign policy advisor, Dan Senor, said his candidate would not rule out one-on-one negotiations.
No one wants to take military action. And it's got to be a comprehensive strategy. And we should utilize a range of tools in our toolkit in achieving that diplomatic outcome. And
so he would sit down for bilateral talks with Iran.
His approach is we've got to reach a diplomatic solution. That is the key here, to stop Iran from moving forward. And he will not rule out any of these tools. Now, let me be clear. As president, he's going to have to assess the situation and make a judgment. What's the best way to get there?
Joining us from Washington, former State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley, and here on set, MSNBC contributor Jonathan Capehart of The Washington Post, and New York Times Magazine editor, Mr. Sunday Morning himself, Hugo Lindgren. P.J., please give us some clarity and some answers here, because I am so confused. As far as Iran, the fact that Dan Senor is saying that Governor Romney might not rule out one-on-one negotiations with the Iranians over the nuclear program seems to muddy the waters, which are quite muddy already, regarding what a Mitt Romney foreign policy strategy would look like. I mean, it seems to basically be, it would be a lot like President Obama's strategy, only he would mean it more. How do you assess it?
No, in fact, that is the conundrum for Mitt Romney. For example, the last 24 hours, you heard a Republican talking point like Lindsey Graham saying, hey, I hope that Obama doesn't take the bait and negotiate. Well, if he doesn't negotiate, that leaves two unpopular and difficult policy options. One is Iranian capitulation, which is not likely to happen, and the other is military conflict, which would be very unpredictable and undoubtedly very costly. So on this, it is actually a responsible, foreign policy option to say that he will have a comprehensive strategy, which is exactly what Obama has pursued over the past 4 years, a mixture of a willingness to negotiate, but putting definite pressure on Iran, as we've seen in these sanctions.
Hugo, the foreign policy debate is a weird one. It's a particularly weird one right now. I mean, I think it's in many ways relevant, and we just outlined all the things that are going on around the world. But in terms of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, there has not been, I mean, there's been certainly over Libya a lot of criticism coming from the right over the White House's handling of the events. But in terms of measurable steps, things that they would do differently, there has not been a ton of daylight.
Well, there's some. I mean, I think the basic position of the Romney campaign is that the U.S. can be more assertive, can say supply arms to the rebels in Syria. That's a pretty big difference. There's an idea there that America can play a more interventionist role, not in terms of boots on the ground, but in terms of really being clear about trying to sway events one way or the other. Whereas
how is that different than what Obama has been trying to do?
Well, they're not arming the rebels in Syria.
Multilateralism, though. I mean, no, we're not arming the rebels different. Because we say we may not know if the rebels are, who's who among the rebels. But which is not a question that Mitt Romney's had to answer.
And I would also say, once the Republicans sort of sow the seeds of military intervention and boots on the ground, they run up against the wall of public opposition to more military.
Well, but I don't think they are talking about boots on the ground, U.S. boots on the ground.
But I think that's why it's such an interesting difference in what Dan Senor is saying today than where it seemed like Ryan was going just a couple weeks ago, because that was part of why I think Biden was trying to push him to say, are you saying you would keep American forces on the ground longer in Afghanistan? Are you saying you would commit forces to Iran and Syria? Because they know that is a death knell for Romney. So now they've backed them up going into this debate because they know a very strong majority of this country does not want intervention, does not want more boots on the ground, wants more multilateralism. So they can't. And does Romney even know, by the way, that in this negotiation process that Russia happens to be part of the P5+1 talks? Our big great enemy. Like, he's going to have to talk to them. Does he even know that?
Jonathan, I want to talk about Libya too. That is certain to come up tonight, and there's been a lot of criticism this weekend. Marco Rubio on CBS suggesting sort of, I won't say conspiracy theories, but sort of. Let's listen to what he said this Sunday.
One of the narratives that the Obama campaign has laid out is that bin Laden is dead, they've bragged about that forever, and that al-Qaeda is in retreat. And you start to wonder that they basically say, do not allow any story to emerge that counters that narrative. Is that why for 2 weeks they told us that the Libyan incident in Benghazi was a popular uprising and not a terrorist attack? Because it ran counter to their campaign narrative. I hope that that's not true, but that's what you start to wonder about.
You start to wonder about it. I will read from David Ignatius in the Washington Post today. Yes. CIA assessment. The currently available information suggests, I cannot read, that the demonstrations in Benghazi were spontaneously inspired by the protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo and evolved into a direct assault against the U.S. consulate and subsequently its annex. There are indications that extremists There are indications that extremists participated in the violent demonstrations. NBC News has not confirmed this, but certainly the more you get into this, which yes, has been complicated. I do not think White House messaging has been particularly transparent on this, but there is a CIA assessment that suggests that Susan Rice was not obfuscating that.
Right. Weekend. Well, NBC News hasn't confirmed, but David Ignatius is a fantastic reporter. And when he had this column out, I think it was Saturday, talking about what Susan Rice said on those Sunday shows was directly from CIA talking points from the day before. Here's the thing: when it comes to politics, it's all black and white. Good versus evil, you're right, I'm wrong, the whole thing. When it comes to foreign affairs and international relations, foreign policy, you're dealing with a murky world of gray. And as we're seeing with the CIA assessments, what they say on Monday could very well be different on Tuesday, different on Wednesday, because they are getting reports in from the field, information comes in, they reinterpret, and if you read any of these cables, they're filled with all of these mushy words, like the evidence suggests that maybe this is
as we now know from Darrell Issa and Mr. Chaffetz, guess what? There might have been a CIA operation going on that compound, and that may be why the CIA didn't actually declassify those cables that the Republicans are now hitting President Obama, saying, well, they knew that it may not have been spontaneous. Well, those cables weren't actually declassified by the CIA for several days.
PJ, I want to go back to you on this in terms of the politicizing, making Libya a political football. And there have been accusations on both the right and the left. Certainly, Darrell Issa's actions this weekend have outraged a lot of folks on the left that are saying this was completely inappropriate. You're doing this because it's campaign season. Those on the right are saying the president hasn't been forthcoming with the American public because, in fact, it is election season. What is your read on sort of who gets stuck with the hot potato in the end on this, as far as this being a political football?
Well, it's regrettable because from inside government, as I was for 30 years, for the intelligence community to spend 8 days before Matt Olson, the head of the NCTC, to come out and say, yes, this was an act of terrorism, which is applying a legal definition in terms of understanding not only what happened, but also the political agenda behind it, actually from a government standpoint was light speed. I am uncomfortable that we want to politicize this. I mean, going back to the former administration, it took them about a year before they were able to say, the intelligence on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq turned out to be wrong. So these things are complicated and do take some time. I think for Romney, he's got some advantages here because you not only have the situation in Libya, you have this news of a potential attack in Jordan, you've got the mayhem now in Lebanon spilling out from Syria. He can make an effective attack against the president, saying, he took a kind of an arm's length view to events in the Arab Spring that haven't turned out so well, and the pictures tend, to support that narrative. I think he's tried, as Chris Sincilla said this morning, he's tried twice to swing at Libya, hasn't connected yet. So I will be interested to see how he approaches this tonight.
Yeah, somehow the need for speed on intelligence gathering doesn't really ring. So I don't know how I don't know that that's the greatest, biggest, most powerful arrow in one's quiver, given what you just just outlined, PJ, that sometimes folks need to do the actual factual research before they can go out proclaiming things to be the work of extremist terrorists or not. At any rate, we will see tonight. Thank you, as always, to PJ Crowley for your time and expertise and answers, my friend. Thank you.